Yep. There we go. All right. Music's so good this morning. Just songs just really speak to, I think, what I want to think with you all about, this whole idea of winding road and still have such a long way to go. Michael, pull up the first slide. We're at the end of our series. I thought this was going to be an all-summer series, this whole idea of the spiritual gifts of travel. Oh, it's behind me. That's right. The spiritual gifts of travel. And then I realized, you know what, I think maybe we'll end it on after a 3-week series. So it's a brief series, a mini-series on the spiritual gifts. I've said all I could think of. But I want to sort of recap for you where we've been with this. For some of you who've been in and out and might not have caught the first couple, but we began by thinking about the fact that life calls us into a journey, that vacation and vocation actually come from the same root word, that there's this idea in which vacation is not simply an opportunity to let go, but it's also an opportunity to sort of get in. It's an opportunity to participate. And in fact, it's a calling in that sense. I think our text that day was the creation story, one of the creation stories in 7 days. This whole idea that our purpose, we are created well, I'd want to say we're created to vacate, but we're actually created to participate, to let go and to engage as well. So then we came to the second Sunday. Oh, and also this whole idea of chaos and restitution. I think I mentioned to you Arthur Frank, who came up with this wonderful idea, and he wrote this book called The Wounded Storyteller, when he discovered in his own dealing with his own cancer and terminal illness that in the hospital, people orient themselves around certain ways of telling their story, of thinking of who they are, of thinking who we are. And so oftentimes it's in a mode of chaos. That's a very typical orientation. And things, obstacle, life sort of falls apart. And then we respond to it out of chaos. But generally we move to restitution. You know folks probably you can think of who never get out of that chaos mode, and life just continues in that whirlwind. You can oftentimes get drawn into it. Restitution becomes our model. In fact, it's kind of the Western way of life, which is basically fix it. Whatever it takes, we just go to get it fixed. The problem that Arthur Frank found out, of course, was that there's a lot of life you can't fix. Then what do? Just go, must just be the way things are. And I think we discussed the idea that this sometimes is that we say it's the way it is. But in reality, when you enter into life as a quest, when you realize that we're called into this day-to-day, moment-to-moment participation in the kingdom, that the mystery invites us into whatever it is. And in fact, it's not just all that it is a whole lot more, even though it remains mystery. So this idea of quest. So then we came to the next Sunday where we talked about salt, and I mentioned to you how salt loses, the idea of losing its essence, and in fact salt can't lose its essence, and in fact salt never loses its essence. What happens is that salt loses its flavor by appearance, by what's added to it or what's detracted from the ingredients mixed with it, that in fact salt can't lose its saltiness. And then as a metaphor, if we're salt of the earth, then exactly what does that mean? What part of God's essence with us are we to one another? And this idea then that sometimes before we journey, whether it's to work, whether it's to dinner, whether it's to breakfast, whether it's to around the world on a vacation, as we go about the world on this journey as God's people, as people of creation, then maybe the question is, what do we need to unpack before we go? So today I want to think with you about the third thing, and that is the idea of, obstacles. Sometimes life just comes at you in a different direction. Sometimes things happen you certainly didn't plan for. But I want to think with you this idea that maybe obstacles are in fact not in the way, but that in fact obstacles are the way in. I wanted to start off with a song. I'm going to wait and save it towards the end. But you all recognize this song. I think you know this one. Actually, I'll start off the first verse because it's just a beautiful melody. Let's see if I can. Oops. It's one of my favorite songs. I actually oftentimes will sing this song in my head. Go. What happened here? There we go. Secret of life is enjoying the passage of time. Any fool can do it. There ain't nothing to it. No one knows how we got to the top of the hill. Since we're only here for a while, might as well enjoy the ride. So that's what I was going to start off with. Okay, it's one of my favorite songs. Then I got to thinking about this passage, and I thought, you know what? This is the absolute worst possible song to sing for this message. Because I mean, really, is that it? Is that all there is? It's just enjoying the passage of time, right? Just that's all it is. Just lay back, just enjoy it. Is that not sort of denial? Doesn't it sort of feel like a slap in the face? I mean, if you just listen to news, if you just watch TV, if you just think about some of your own friends, some of the things, if you think of your own life sometimes, I mean, in reality, is this not just sort of an insult to this whole idea of the fact that life is full of obstacles? And I got to thinking about people that I've known and the kinds of things, and if I sang that song in their presence, wouldn't I be insulting their own intelligence, not to mention their own experience? And then I think about the world's filled with the disasters that we've had, not just that we've had, but that others experience around the world, the poverty, the hunger, the terminal illness. I think about the local kinds of things. I think about if I took this song right now over to Lindsay, who's the owner over at Wine House, where we've been having our wine and wishful thinking. Some of you who are on the Facebook list might have seen where the roof of her building caved in during the storm last week and just shut the whole shop down. It's her whole business. It's everything she did. She put everything into it, got some investors, moved down from Missouri, started this business on her own, and it's just caved in. And now there's opportunities to participate and help, but I think I'll walk over there and I'll sing this song, and I'm sure she'd go, well, thank you, that's really helpful. And then I think about this other passage that we've read. Now I love the reading that Kay did. I love the text, this Message version, which I think is really, it clearly is interpretive. It clearly he's taken these texts and been interpretive with them. But I find the interpretation really close to what I feel is, for at least for me, is experientially true. So then with Romans 8:28, which is that familiar one that we might remember in its more traditional form in the Revised Standard, we might remember it as, all things work together for good to those who love the Lord. And then he, of course, spells it out. God knows us better than we know ourselves, knows our pregnant condition, keeps us present before the holy. That's why we can be so sure that every detail in our lives of love for God is worked into something good. Again, part of me wants to go, really? I mean, if I'm honest, if I'm telling the truth, part of me wants to just say, I don't get that one bit. That just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem fair. And of course I have friends, because I always play these out in my head. I always have these dialogues in my head. I have multiple friends in my head. And I'll sit there and start arguing, and I'll say, really, that's what it is. And then, of course, somebody will argue back and say, okay, no, it's just we don't understand. It's a mystery. We can't understand God's ways, and that you just have to let it go. And I'm going, no, you don't just let it go. Is that the answer for everything? Is when you don't understand it, you just let it go then? Is this still not denying the honesty of the pain, the frustration of the mystery? So I had to come back and think about exactly what are obstacles. I remember a friend of the family's, a guy named Aaron. My sons knew Aaron, and I won't give you too many other details about it, but I've talked about Aaron in here before. Aaron was active in the community. He was a kid who'd had multiple cancers. And he was very active in Kids Who Care, and he's just an amazing spirit, in spite of all of the illnesses that he suffered, and even his own mother, who had had a number of cancers that she had to deal with. Life just caving in on them. But you never would have necessarily noticed it about Aaron, other than his height was a little diminished because of the illnesses. He died at 20 years of age from just complications to his 5th cancer. But throughout those years, Aaron was just a spirit of, not survival. No, he wasn't a spirit of survival. And if you'd said he was a fighting spirit, he wasn't that. He was a spirit of life. He just participated, and he engaged. He had a prosthetic eye. I've talked about it in the past. When Linda and I used to take our son Tim, who was younger, with Aaron, the two of them, they would dress up for trick or treating, and we would take them out on Halloween. And Aaron never really had much of a costume, and Tim was always going like, "Aaron, where's your costume?" And Aaron's like, "I am a costume," because he had a prosthetic eye, and the eye was given to him by the Dallas Cowboys. And as he got older, a little bit bigger, that eye was not always real tight in its fit. We walked up to one house one evening, and Linda and I were on the sidewalk, and Aaron and Tim walked up to the door, and the guy came out, literally, I'm not kidding, he had one of those googly eye kind of glasses, and he said, "Hey, kids, what about this?" And Aaron literally pulled his eye out and said, "What about this?" And it totally freaked the guy. And my wife and I were just sitting there shaking our head going, Aaron was amazing. And I think to myself, did that work for good? Certainly in some ways. Would we say, well, Aaron got the best end of it? I think maybe so, but not at first. I don't think that's the first way we would see it. I was talking with a friend of mine about a month and a half ago when I was in Kansas performing at a storytelling festival, and I've told about Kevin Kling before, an amazing individual. Kevin endured a almost fatal motorcycle accident, went through multiple surgeries. He was already malformed. He already had a left arm that was small and didn't function well, was mostly paralyzed. So the accident left him with paralysis on his right side, the function of his left leg. Over multiple surgeries, he eventually got the use of his right arm back, but not completely. His body was put back together so many different times. He said it was kind of funny. Sometimes people would show up with pictures of me so that the doctor had some guideline of what I looked like beforehand. And he said, I always got worried because one friend brought a picture with me holding my dog. And I was afraid they'd get the wrong one. But after he got better, he said he would go back for just makeup surgeries. He said once he was in the hallway, and this kid, he was wearing his hospital gown, and this kid walks up to him, and the kid had a scar on his face, down from the side of his head. And he said, "Hey, mister." And Kevin looks down, and he says, "Hey, what's going on? What happened to you?" He said, "I had a terrible fall, and I got 12 stitches in my head." And Kevin smiled, and he said, "Wow. Well, I had surgery, and I had stitches," and then he starts with his head, and he shows back behind the scalp there, and then he follows it down his arm, and then he follows more stitches down his leg, around to this leg, and down the other side of his back, completely sewn up, all around him. And the kid looks at him and says, "Yeah, but mine really hurt." That has become a quote for me, Kevin laughed and he said, you cannot argue with a person's pain. It is their own. Sometimes I think about all of these things and I think, well, my little complaints are petty. I didn't get the seat that I wanted on the plane. I got landed at the airport. I didn't get the car reservation. In fact, they lost my reservation. And then I have to take a cab to a site off the airport property in order to get a cab if I'm lucky. And then, of course, the room didn't work out. We think of small things in comparison to things like Aaron or Kevin's experiences. We think of these things, and yet the reality is, as small as they are nonetheless obstacles. We experience them every day. The waitress has an attitude. Every day we experience them. The question is, what do we do with them? The obstacles that sort of get in our way almost feel like sometimes just a draw of luck, or perhaps we might even say it's God testing us. 4 years ago, I'm going to get this wrong. Nancy may be able to help me. I'm glad my wife and my other sons are not in here. I don't remember when they got married, but I know that they got married in November, but that wasn't their official wedding. And I don't know that I've ever told this story in here, but their official wedding actually happened in July, 5 months before the big wedding, before Tim and Emily got married. The reason for that was because they were going on an African mission trip together. one of Nancy's trips. And they wanted to have their passports all changed, and they wanted to have everything together between the two of them as a couple so that there wasn't a lot of confusion. So they wanted to get married ahead of time, but it needed to be somewhat secret because they were going to have the big celebration in November. So Linda and I decided to do the ceremony. I sang one of Tim's favorite songs, Fire and Rain, Matthew, and everyone, and Emily's mother came, and they weren't dressed up. But we were going to go over to the Botanic Gardens, and we were just going to have some pictures taken just with a camera. Emily's mom brought a camera, just a 35-millimeter camera, and Emily was just wearing a little flower dress. She was, however, holding flowers. So when we walked up to the gate to get into the Japanese Gardens, which is a wonderful place and holds so many memories for our family, where we've had family pictures for years, and for Tim as well. We got to that little gate and turnstile, and the woman called out and said, "Excuse me, are you going to take wedding pictures?" And we said, "Well, it's not really. I mean, it's not like it's not like it's a big ceremony. We're just going to have a quick little thing." We tried to explain the whole dilemma and how it was the middle of the day, and it was in the middle of the week, and there was nobody there. And we said, "We're going to be 5 minutes. We just want to step in the trees." She said, "It's a $300 fee." I said, "Well, I don't mind." And Linda, of course, was trying to be calm about this. And honestly, Emily was trying to be rational, but the woman stuck by the rules. The rules are, if you're having a wedding, there is a wedding fee. If you're a photographer, there is a photographer fee. And we said, but there wasn't any arguing. So we said, fine. I looked over at Emily's mom and Linda, and I said, "You know what? Botanic Garden's huge. We'll just go over to the rose area. It's beautiful." So we started to just leave, and we walked across the street, and we started walking over to the rose area. And as we're walking down the sidewalk, I noticed a golf cart coming around this way. And then I looked behind me, and there was another golf cart coming in this way. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're like fugitives, you know. And we said, well, just kind of duck behind here. So we literally sort of turned the corner real quick and tried to duck back behind some rose bushes so that we could at least sort of have a beautiful little setting for this wedding. But just the couple, take a picture. We'll do the ceremony across the street in the parking lot, for goodness sakes. But sure enough, the guys both walk up and they say, "Sir, ma'am, you all cannot do that here until you fill out the form and pay the fee." It's empty. Nobody. And everyone was staying extremely calm. We laughed about it and said, we could probably do this if we did it while we're walking. And then stopped, took a picture, kept walking. And that's when finally someone said, "What about the duck pond?" The duck pond's beautiful. You know, and it's fun, and we've been there. We went there as kids, et cetera. And so, you know, we drove across the street, drove through Trinity Park. We got to the duck pond, and it was not too crowded, just a few people here and there. We got out of the car, not before looking around to see if there was any golf carts driving up out of nowhere. And so we walked across the grounds. There was this beautiful, huge rock. It's still there. It's a gigantic, looks like an ancient relic, just this giant rock, right next to the duck pond, kind of behind some trees. Perfect spot. I got out the guitar, and we were just about to start with Linda opening up the little ceremony, the little book, and then Emily said, "Wait." And we looked over, and there was a grandmother and two small grandchildren, two little grandgirls. And one of them had one of those caps on that you wear when you've had chemotherapy, and her head was bald. And she said to the little girl, I get a little choked up on this one. She said, "Would you like to be our flower child, our flower girl?" And her face lit up, and she came over and grabbed the flowers. Emily tore off the petals, put the petals in her hand, and she stood next to Emily and Tim, and we did the ceremony, and her grandmother and her little sister there were watching and smiling, and she just was beaming. The girl was just beaming. She'd taken off her cap, had her bald head there, and she was just beaming. So after it was all over and I sang the song, she threw the flowers up in the air and then just started dancing around with throwing the flowers, and it was wonderful, and we took pictures. And afterwards, the grandmother came up and said, this was her first day out from her first chemo treatment. You know, she had leukemia. She said, this was a godsend. She said, it's the first time that she smiled. And as we left, you know, we were like, what a wonderful thing. I mean, just, you know, we couldn't have planned for that. And it's so much like so many of these obstacles that we sort of just wait for and that we work through or that we just allow to take place without being too combative or too frustrated or too victimized. But when we open up, it seems like there's always something. I've said it in here many times. It's all God moments. They're all God moments. They're just waiting. We're the ones not often paying attention. And as we got to the end and we got these pictures taken, if you'll ask Emily now which ceremony was really amazing and wonderful, she'll say the ceremony that we had in November was beautiful, here in the church, the choir and everything. But then she'll say, but the one that is the most touching, the one that's meant the most to all of us that were there was, of course, the one involving the grandchild. Obstacles can sometimes seem like they get in our way. In reality, I think obstacles are the way in. They're an opportunity. I think that, in fact, if we all think of ourselves as being a part of the one in whom we live and move and have our being, if, in fact, we truly believe we are all connected, that we are really all a part of this divine presence of the holiness that's always around us, that obstacles are not, in fact, something suddenly presenting themselves. They are always there. It's simply the winding road. It's simply the way life is. But what's also amazing is that God's in the midst of every single twist and turn. God is present in every single seemingly unfathomable or insurmountable problem. And God is inviting us to see something, to engage. I had a recent post on Facebook. You can go look at it if you want to. I did this workshop yesterday, Saturday, in San Antonio. And after the workshop, I had lots of good praise. There was a friend of mine from Houston. The two of us were doing this workshop at this theological center, and it was about storytelling. I was wearing jeans and just a shirt, tucked in. My friend was wearing shorts, nice shorts, shirt, baseball cap. About 60 people, and we're sitting on the stage, very casual. Lots of wonderful feedback. There's a post that came in last night. And I just only talk about it because it's a perfect illustration. I really didn't ask. I'm going to email her back and say thank you so much. She posted and said, I don't know about how the thing went because she wasn't there. It's a person I know, but not personally very much, just one I'm familiar with. Another performer. Her words were, I am always troubled by people who never take their work seriously. It looks as though the two of you just got up out of bed. Perhaps you should take some more pride in your work. Perhaps you should take a note from and then mention another performer who happens to wear slacks, suspenders, and a bow tie and do things right. Now, I have to tell you, I don't know if you've ever, gotten criticized on the internet before. It's not like this is the first time. It's more like it's just struck me as odd. At first I thought, well, I know this person, but not intimate. I mean, not personally. I just know who she is. I thought, well, maybe it's just a joke. But then every time I showed it to a couple other people, they were like, nah, she's pretty much just telling you, you look crap. Well, in fact, she'd said, I've seen you in person and you look the same. So I hate to even say that. I have emailed her, by the way, this morning. My first reaction might have been what most of us would be to all these kinds of things, is to be defensive, to get angry, and then to justify something. Like, well, excuse me, I just started to look for a picture and see what she looks like when she's performing. Or maybe I'll get a clown with suspenders and a bow tie and say, here, how's this? I mean, I thought of all of these sarcastic sort of remarks, and this was wrong. Then I thought I would just address the wrongness there on Facebook. Then I stopped, and I reminded myself, I really do this, and I encourage you to do this. If, in fact, we are about the kingdom, if, in fact, we are already a part of it, and if, in fact, we desire some time in order to be aware of that, then we have to ask ourselves, whenever we get upset with people, why? What's the real goal? This beatitude, the way he translated, I thought was amazing. You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world. And I thought, I'm not sure where she's coming from. But to simply react is to also deny the fact that it doesn't matter what she thinks, we are all connected. So maybe I need to understand something. So I've emailed her just to sort of ask what's going on. I have to speak honestly in terms of how I'm confused, but she hasn't responded yet. But I just thought to myself, sometimes these things happen, and our natural tendency is to think the woman at the booth at the park, how wrong is that? It's legalistic. It's so literal. Can't we just bend a little bit? Don't we see what's about to happen here? I mean, it happens all the time to us. Kevin Kling, I want to finish with one last story real quickly for Kevin Kling. He said once at the end of a series of weeks that he spent with a theater in Minnesota called Interact, he said he discovered something he didn't expect to. Kevin didn't ask to be in an accident that almost killed him. He didn't ask to be partially paralyzed to this day, his face still very disfigured. He was an actor. He was an NPR commentator. He didn't ask for any of this stuff. He joined this theater company, Interact Theater, and in the midst of this thing, these are all people with different disabilities. One who's got aphasia, who has trouble putting her thoughts to speech and says, that guy that said, I think, therefore I am, she says, I can't think, so I guess that means I'm not. But as she's been in this program over a period of years, over a period of months, Kevin says, now she says, I am, therefore I think. Kevin said that when he first came into this group for the first time and all these people with all these disabilities, the director came up and said, how many of you, before we get into this new program we're doing, how many of you, if I offered you a pill that took everything away, that put everything back, that made everything so-called normal, how many of you would take the pill? Kevin was the only one out of 25 people that said, I would. And he didn't understand why. At the end of their tour, they were invited to go to Australia, and they performed outside of Sydney at this outdoor festival where there were 5,000 people. They prepared a song to sing with this opera singer, Terry Rhodes, who's a phenomenal tenor opera singer there in Sydney. And as he was singing, he did these performances. They got ready to do their conclusion, their finale, and the string quartet did not have the music. Something happened. And quickly, the director of the performance came out and said, we're just going to have to go with a duet with the opera singer and another one. And Kevin was like, no, we've worked on all this piece. How can we do this? And he said, it's all right. The guy got up and did his duet, but at the end, he looked out at the crowd. They'd already heard this Interact Theater do its performance and sing. He said, I understand there's a piano on the theater across the field. It's a small theater. They use it for small performances, but it may work. It's probably in tune. Would you all be willing to join us over there? Kevin said 5,000 people stood up, grabbed their picnic baskets and their blankets, marched across the field. They ended the concert with the performance with the opera singer. Kevin says it to me. He told me, he said, at that moment, I knew what it meant when Dante said he was really willing to step into the inferno to know why. He said, I knew what it meant to see myself from the other side of the mirror. He said, and I knew what it meant finally to say, no matter what I've been through, if offered that pill, I would say no. We're going to